All right, so everyone did the homework, I'm assuming, and I mean, I only do sometimes parts of it, so I'm right there with you. But this was an interesting study. When I picked it, I went over it and I was like, oh yeah, that's great. Work, like interesting topic. But I think that I kind of didn't quite realize that most of my talk was on church discipline. I was like, oh, as I was getting into it. I think when I first picked the topic, I just saw hard work and was like, yeah, well, that's interesting. I'd like to talk on that. And then I was like, oh no, it's on church discipline, really. So if you guys went through that, you'll know that, it's not like an easy topic to go over. It's tough when things get to that level, that it would have to be under church discipline, that a pastor or the elders would have to be meeting with somebody and talking through something that was sin and that wasn't accepted. But for most of us, I feel like probably 95% of us, we're not going to necessarily be involved in church discipline. That's typically kind of high level, the staff, the elders, maybe even the leadership. But for most of us, we aren't going to be involved in that process, which is a great thing, right? It's tough things to be involved in. I know it's probably not the pastor's favorite thing to have to address those issues from time to time, but they do come up, and it is wonderful that God did give guidelines for how to work through those issues for a church, because they are present, they are real, they do come up, and they're difficult. But for us, we're most of the time gonna see it on kind of that first level, which is just having conflict in our interpersonal relationships with other Christians. And for most of us, we'd love to believe that that isn't the case, that doesn't happen. But honestly, I think we have it just as much as outside of the church. We are human beings. We have a sinful nature. We sin against each other. You sin against me. I sin against you. We have misunderstandings sometimes just in passing conversation. What did they mean by that? That kind of hurt my feelings. We can just do things intentionally or unintentionally that hurt each other. So this is just normal. This happens in our relationships with our spouse, with our children, if you're in the workplace. I mean, we all know that you can't come out of a workplace and not have interpersonal conflict relationships. It just happens. I mean, I laugh because it's like, for us, conflict begins at 6 a.m. whenever my kids wake up. It's like we start the day, I'm not even kidding you, most days with like somebody's angry at like 6 a.m, and I'm like, don't hit each other, like right away. And that's just my life, like every day where I'm in the middle of breaking up little conflicts between my kids just all day long. So it starts at like the youngest of age, and it keeps going with us, where we have to figure out how to have healthy, good relationships with other Christians, so that we can have thriving relationships, because that's so wonderful for us. For the church, we would have good relationships, and for the unbelieving world watching. They see us and they watch us, and they take note of how we're treating each other and how we're working through issues. And I'm sure it's so interesting for them to see us and other believers kind of having controversy. They want to watch. So make sure you're doing it right, and see what these Christians are all about. So unfortunately, relationship issues have been present since, the beginning of time. As soon as sin came into the world, we started having relationship issues. One example in the Old Testament that I find super interesting is in Exodus. So it's after the Exodus. So Moses has led the people out of Egypt. They're encamped at the mountain of God, and they're now in their wilderness time. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, he's coming to visit them, and he actually is bringing back Moses' wife and 2 boys. So they didn't go through the Exodus process. Basically what he did was he was like, go be safe. So he sent his wife and kids away during that time of going through the Exodus. So they actually weren't a part of that, it's just so fascinating to me. Like, that's so weird. Like, what a big thing for Moses, and his wife wasn't even there. But he knew she was safe, and maybe that's what he needed to like be able to do that effectively and well. So they're off. So Jethro brings them back, and they come and they have warm greetings and everything. And then it says the very next morning, so this is in Exodus 18:13 to 16. So the very next day, Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes of God and his laws." So this was Moses' full-time job after the Exodus. So he's sitting there, and they're encamped in the wilderness, and he is literally from morning till night listening to the people's complaints, conflicts with each other. I mean, he was like, a psychologist, basically a therapist, just listening all day and trying to decide, like with wisdom, like, what does God want me to do? So, and the people at this point, they say, people strong. Can you even imagine? You're like, wow, that is exhausting. And men, they kind of glaze over. We've talked about this when you talk to them, like after a certain amount of time. I'm not sure who Moses was, that he could sit there and judge from morning till night, like everybody's conflicts, just like, they did this to me, I would have been, that would have been unreal. But what I also find super interesting about this story is Jethro's response to all this. So instead of saying, you guys are, believers, you're Israelites, you have God, what are you guys doing? This is awful, just stop it right now. Who are you people? Instead, he comes up with this plan of how they can do this better, how they can talk about their conflicts. So they appoint some wise men, some wise Israelites, to deal with kind of the smaller issues, and they leave the really big ones to Moses. So that system seems to work a little bit better, and then they continue basically doing this, where this is what Moses does. So we can really see that the relationship conflict issues have been around forever, and they are something, I think, through Jethro's response, they are something we have to deal with. It isn't something we can sweep under the rug and just say, hey, we love God, we love Jesus, we don't need to deal with these things. Let's just everybody try and get along. We need to actually deal with them in positive, healthy ways, like they continued to do. And then an interesting verse at the end in Exodus 18:23. So after they've decided how to do this, they say that the end goal is that everyone would go to their place in peace. That's the end goal, that everyone would go to their place in peace. And that just reminds me, like, for us, don't we want relational peace? Like, that's the end goal. Let's just, whatever the issue is, let's deal with it, and then let's just have peace, right? Some conflicts can go on for years, and we all know how draining and exhaustive that is. It just drains you physically, emotionally, to have an issue that is going on. We want to be able to go to our place in peace. A Bible verse that talks about this is 1 Thessalonians 5:13. So we went over in 1 Thessalonians, it says, be at peace among yourselves. And then in 1 Corinthians 7:15, it says, God has called you to peace. So we are actually called as believers to live a life of peace. Have you guys heard of Dr. Henry Cloud? I really like some of the stuff that he puts out. He's out in Laguna, and he's a psychologist or therapist. When looking through some of his stuff when studying for this, he says, every good relationship involves confronting, forgiving, repenting, and repenting. So confronting, forgiving, and repenting. And then I would add to that, which leads to relational peace. Like we're talking about, the end goal is this relational peace that we all want to have with our kids, with our husbands, with our spouse, with our friends, everything. So why don't you bring up my first slide? We're going to go over confronting. So our first point here, I could move to the side, but I'm tall, so I want to move to the side. So it's God is present among us and partners with us as we confront fellow believers to gently restore them. So if you guys want to write that down, that's our first point. And our working definition for the word confronting or confront is to meet with someone face to face, and I wrote in quotations, when possible. You know, it's not always possible, but when possible, to meet with someone face to face and deal with a problem or difficult situation. And I found that it was in the dictionary, it says to meet face to face. That is the definition of confronting. You're meeting someone face to face and going through something. So when we have a conflict that needs to have confrontation, I think we all kind of know when it's reached that level where we need to say something. You know, you can feel it inside of you, like, hey, we're at the point where something needs to be said. Either we're not seeing change, this is something that is going on, you know, and it's not ending, or something was said that or done to me at such a level that I can't just let that go. I think there are things that we can let go of. You know, the Bible even talks about that. But we know when something is said or done that we need to confront. And so we need to address these issues because if we don't, they just go on, right? They go on and they go on, and we build up this bitterness and this resentment towards people, and just sin starts coming out in ways we never expected or planned for. So we also need to address the reality of what's going on in situations, right? Have you ever been in a situation where you're just hoping it gets better? Like you're like, I don't want to confront this person. I'm just hoping like it gets better. But really, we need to address the reality of the situation. Like what is happening? We can be hopeful that things will change, but a lot of times if we just hope and keep hoping and keep hoping and don't address, then it just keeps getting worse, so that I'm sinning, you're sinning, and then we're just sinning. So one of the main verses for biblical verses for confronting is found in Matthew 18, and we're going to go over that. So that's a verse that has to deal with you have wronged me. Like you have sinned against me, you've wronged me, you've hurt me. So I'm going to you and saying, hey, you hurt me. Now Matthew 5 is another example we're going to go through of I hurt you. I know that I did something wrong and I hurt you. So I'm going to be the person to go and let you know, like, I hurt you. I'm so sorry. Jay Adams, he's a Christian author, and he writes that in an ideal world, that these two people would meet in the middle, that they'd be running towards each other and that they would see each other. So the person who was wronged and the person who did the wrong, that they would both have such a heart for restoration and forgiveness that they would be running to meet each other and that they'd see each other in the middle. But the truth is that sometimes you find yourself, you're going the whole 100% to somebody, and that happens a lot. You know, where we have to go the whole distance to come and to make something right. Before we begin the confronting process, which I find is definitely necessary, I think we need to first ask ourselves, what is our motivation? What's our motivation in confronting somebody? So in this book, Irresistible, Andy Stanley has a great, powerful quote that I think really addresses like what our heart should be in when we confront somebody. He says this: the proper new covenant, which we're living in, the proper new covenant response to sin is not jealousy. It's not anger. It's not even righteous anger. The proper response to sin is a broken heart. The new covenant response to sin is John 3:16, or as Paul put it, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should gently restore them. The proper response to sin is to leave your gift at the altar and to seek to repair the broken relationship. The proper response to sin is the father in the parable of the prodigal son, eyes on the road, praying for his son's return. Jesus' point in telling that trilogy of parables was to illustrate our Heavenly Father's attitude towards sinners. From God's vantage point, sinners are like lost things. If your phone is lost, you don't get angry at your phone. If you do, you have some work to do. We don't get angry with things for them. If sin makes you mad, but it doesn't break your heart, you've guessed it. You have some work to do. I found that like really convicting to me, and as thinking like back about some of my conflicts that I've had with people, I think like, oh, okay, that's probably where it went wrong. My heart wasn't broken for them and the sin that was present. I was angry, I was just mad, or just had the sense of being wronged, or something in this is very wrong. And then when you confront in that way, nothing's really resolved usually, and it's not received well on either ends. So I have an example of this where it's like confrontation gone wrong. I'm going to let you guys know 2 examples of major confrontation gone wrong. So I'm out one night. I got married at 21, so I was young. I had gotten married, and actually all my girlfriends were married at 21 about or younger, so my good girlfriends. So we're out one night, it's somebody else's bachelorette party, and my girlfriend is drinking, and she gets a little bit too tipsy, and we go to dinner, and I just remember her kind of bashing her husband and like saying all these things. Now we're young, you know, and she's just kind of going for it, saying like all these things about him. I knew that, you know, their marriage was going to have some difficulties because we had warned her previously probably not to marry this guy. But nonetheless, they're married, they're having some difficulties. I come out of that night and I'm just like, I don't know. I was just disturbed by the whole thing. I think I was young and married and just felt like this isn't right. That's not what we're supposed to be doing, right? We're Christians, we're married, we're supposed to be loving each other and getting along with our spouses, and I just felt like it was wrong. Plus she was drunk and the things she was saying were, you know, not great. So I don't have the guts to confront her, so I email her. You know, it's like somebody that I could see and could drive to see and say, hey, what's going on in your marriage? Instead, I email her. There you go. That's not great. So I email her and I'm like, hey, you were drunk and talking about your husband, and that's not right. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. And then I get an email back that's like, you're the worst example of a Christian. And you know, that's tough to hear. But here's the deal. When looking back, I think, yeah, I probably was, right? My heart was not broken for her. I wasn't really sad like, hey, you're in a marriage and you're 2021 and it's already a failing marriage. They went on to get a divorce. You know, my heart wasn't broken for her in seeing this. I just felt like this sense of wrong. And I think when I look back, I was kind of like, you're a Christian. Like, you're not supposed to do these things. Follow the rules, okay? Like, we're supposed to follow the rules. And I was a pretty good, like, rule follower when it came to, you know, Christianity. I've been a Christian since I grew up, so I knew the rules pretty early on of what we were supposed to do, not supposed to do. So I think I was just more annoyed that you're calling yourself a Christian, you're breaking all the rules, you're doing things you aren't supposed to do. Well, we had the forgiveness talk, we've had all of that. but the relationship was never the same. And I'm not saying this was like a relationship that maybe would have gone on. You know, we were very young. We are high school friends. I'm not saying it would have gone on to be some wonderful relationship or whatnot, but it's still like one of those things that just kind of like sticks out to me, like, oh, that wasn't good. And now looking back, I can really say, like, wow, that quote is so true. My heart wasn't broken for her. I just saw wrong and I wanted to go after the wrong. And so I think before we ever confront somebody, we really need to look at our motivation and go, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because my heart is broken for the sin that's happening, the sin that they're going through, the negative effects that this sin is going to have on their life? And if not, don't confront it. Let God use somebody else to confront them. Or pray about it and see if God can change your heart. Because really, I don't think any good is going to be won in that process. God can do the confronting himself. He can use other people. Or he could use you when your heart's in the right place. So let's read Matthew 18. This is your confrontation verse. If ever you're in a situation where you have to confront or somebody's doing confronting, I feel like this is the verse everybody always goes back to. It's the main one you're going to hear about. If you've done something wrong, it's the main one you're going to hear about too. So that somebody might say, you didn't follow this super well. So Matthew 18:15 to 20, it says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Repeat the word, alone. Alone. We have to do this alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother back. That's restoration. You've gained your brother back. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. So take 2 or 3 others with you. This doesn't have to be that they were literally eyewitnesses to the original thing. Sometimes that doesn't happen. I mean, you're alone and somebody's doing something or saying something. But we want to bring 2 or 3 witnesses who are believers, wise believers. If he refuses to listen to them, so the 2 or 3 witnesses that then have gone with you, you tell it to the church. Now, this isn't always possible because not all of us are in the same church, right, with other believers. But I think in our own church body, this is a model and an example, because if this does happen and it's in your own church, this would be the guidelines that we follow. If they're not in our church, this can be hard to follow, of course, because you could have a friend out in, Wisconsin and you're going through something. I mean, whose church do you take it to, But so you tell it to your church. And I think this helps your church body, right, stay healthy, your immediate church body. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, so he's refusing to listen here to probably the elders, the pastors, people who are saying, hey, this isn't right. What's going on to her or him? What's going on isn't right. Let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, which is an unbeliever, essentially. That was old, that was what was the words called for unbelievers. Truly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And that was for the disciples who are going to be going out and giving this message to people, that whatever they, as they said it, how they were helping with these conflicts, if people were doing this in the right way, that they had the authority basically to say this was done right or this was done wrong. And if, again, I say to you, if the 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. Have you guys heard that verse? It's like a super common verse. And then all of a sudden you're like, that's about like confrontation? Who knew that? You think it's about just like really nice whenever we're in a room and there's 2 or 3 of us, God listens. Well, that's not true. He listens when there's 1 person in a room, But this is about actually confrontation. That's why there's 2 or 3 people in the room, because this was about confrontation and taking it to those levels. And that brings us back to that God loves to have people, our first point, he He is present among us, and he partners with us. He promises his presence, that he is there when we are actually working on these things in a God-given way and in a God-given manner. So I think we've already talked about, so when you go and tell the person, right, you're telling them alone. You're trying to do it face-to-face and not over email, phone, or text. I think email and text are specifically a little bit on the scarier side because those can live on forever, right? You could look at your text or your email over and over again and go over something somebody said to you or something you said to them. So I would say if you're in the middle of a conflict and there is a piece of paper in front of your face that is like a letter, an email, a text, just erase it. Erase it, because it's not doing you any good to keep going over it. That can help you live in bitterness or unforgiveness for years if you have that piece of paper that you could keep looking at. So settle the offense quickly. This is another great point. As quickly as possible, when your heart's in the right place, settle the offense. Otherwise, it just leaves room for sin and gossip and different things like that if you can't get to it quickly. So in verse 20, it says, there I am among them, seeking that unity. There he is, helping us. Isn't that like so neat that he so desires for us to be right with our believers, our people in our life, our believers in our life, our church, that he would be there among us, doing the work with us to get things right. I think that's really exciting and neat and a sweet promise as we're in the middle of these things, that God is with us. Let's go to slide number 2. Now we're going to talk about forgiveness.